but to give everyone who's here some context, you are here for the Asian Pacific American Heritage and Mental Health Month conversation on autism and ADHD webinar. Welcome. We're just waiting for people to arrive. This webinar is hosted in collaboration with the Los Angeles Public Library, with AADI, Asian Americans Disabilities Initiative, with Respectability, and with our guest speaker, Maggie, Dennis Tran, Vanny Lay, Maddie Ullman. These will be our 3 speakers for the day. Okay, I'm going to start the intro a little bit. So we will be discussing autism and ADHD experiences as they relate to the context of Asian American culture and navigating mental health. There will be 2 main themes as we explore both the cultural context and then the individual mental health context as it relates to various neurodivergent conditions and disabilities. Okay, so all of the speakers are back. So we are going to start with the speaker bios. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. So first we have Dennis Tran. Dennis Tran, he, him, is a social impact storyteller, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility advocate, DEIA, brand strategist, and media producer, a graduate from the University of California, Irvine with a public health policy degree. Dennis's diverse background spans a variety of sectors, including digital media, entertainment, technology, healthcare, and philanthropy. As a queer, late-identified ADHD autistic Vietnamese American with partial blindness from glaucoma, Dennis is using profound knowledge, wisdom, and mindset shifts he has gained through his late diagnoses, life coaching, and introspection towards neurodiversity inclusion. He advocates for others in the disability space and those in marginalized communities across various sectors to assure authentic representation, inclusiveness, and accessibility for all. Thank you for being here, Dennis. And next we have Vanny Lay. Vanny Lay, she, her, is a queer Vietnamese American neurodivergent, fighting stigmas and ensuring authentic representation of people with disabilities in film and television. Lay strives to effect social change and champion diversity and inclusion in industries with underrepresented communities in her role at Respectability, a narrative change organization advocating for inclusion of people with disabilities in all spaces. As a late diagnosed ADHDer that was previously misdiagnosed as mild anxiety disorders, she recognizes the importance of representation of mental health in media. Lay is a proud first-generation low-income graduate of University of Southern California, MS Digital Social Media, and BA in Public Relations. Born in Orange County, California, and raised in Tampa, Florida, Lay is based out of Los Angeles, California. In her spare time, she enjoys playing the piano or ukulele and singing, mentoring college students, or catching up on the latest reality TV reunion. Finally, we have Maddie Ullman, adopted from Hong Kong to America. Maddie is a writer, photographer, and storyteller based in Dallas, Texas. Maddie's experience as a Chinese adoptee with cerebral palsy propels her storytelling, and her journey with photography later changed her life. With a deep love of story and collaborative spirit, Maddie is dedicated to raising authentic portrayal of disabilities in Hollywood and beyond. So those are our panel speakers. Thank you, attendees, for being here. Let's see what time it is. Okay, so we're going to start with the questions now, and people may be coming in, but we are going to get started. So we'll cover some basic terminology first. Particularly, we're going to discuss what is neurodiversity, what does it mean, And how does autism and ADHD fit into that context? Let's start with Dennis. Tell us about what neurodiversity.
Neurodiversity to me, it means like kind of like our difference in the brain and how it kind of function from like the typical brain of like neurotypicals of society, and how like ADHD and autism fit into that is kind of is like an umbrella category of like neurodiversity in general. It's like kind of there's like diverse brain, and like I think like autism and ADHD is just one of two type of brain that is underneath that layers of it.
Do you want to add anything, Maddie or Danny?
Yeah, I think Dennis explained it really well. I think the big thing to emphasize too is that even though as neurodivergents, our brains work and think a little differently than a neurotypical person would, it's not necessarily a bad thing or a weakness. It just means that there are different workarounds that we have to figure out and figure out what supports we need. And that's all.
They pretty much covered it. But I'd like to say it's really important to work with your neurodivergence and not against it, because your brain is awesome. So you just need to work with our neurodivergence.
Thank you guys for mentioning that. I just want to add on that, like, probably around estimated statistics of around 15 to 20% of the population is neurodivergent. ADHD and autism does make up a large chunk of that. Other conditions that could fall under neurodivergent includes, dyslexia, dyscalculia, depression also fits under that. So, synesthesia. So these are a couple of different conditions. But we will be discussing more autism and ADHD in this webinar, because that is what our panelists have lived experiences and some other stuff as well. But we'll mention that as we get to it. So we're going to now discuss kind of more the cultural context and kind of the Asian American experience. And our panelists can speak to some of these. First, what are some of the Asian cultural norms that have posed challenges for neurodivergent people, particularly autism and ADHD? Dennis, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think kind of growing up, it's like kind of like not knowing like what neurodiversity is, or even how it's like kind of is like kind of normalized, like where a lot of the times like it pretty much like is tied to genetics or environmental factor growing up, and part of that is like kind of like what perceived as normal, or like certain behavior, certain like condition or neurological condition or neurodiversity like ADHD, autism, like our parent may have or may not have those diagnoses. And I think it's like once it's kind of been passed down from generation, it's kind of come to a place of like, yeah, they can get through life with that the condition without anything, and it's like it was never really problematic. So then when of course like growing up, I always kind of felt shame or like guilted, or kind of like it's considered bad luck to have disability, or it's like kind of like, or when it comes to mental health, it's always kind of like there's shame, judgment, and there's like the comparison aspect to that as well, where it's like, like, oh, you're different from everyone else, like why aren't you like your sibling, or why aren't you like your dad? And I think like growing up, I often witnessed like a lot of like comparisons, and like kind of like seeing my uncle compare my dad a lot, or kind of exclude him a lot because like his disability, or like he's shamed, he's this, or like he's not able to do a certain task or something like that. And I think those are things I kind of witnessed, and kind of growing up, like in terms of myself, like I always get compared to my sibling, or like, oh, how come he's this, or how come he's this, or why are you so different, and why you have a different lifestyle, like what makes you so special, right? And so I think like I kind of gone through that comparison route, but also kind of thing where I didn't fit in the mold of like what a traditional Asian kid would be like, getting good grades and stuff like that. I have all sorts of grades, and so it kind of like going through those stereotypical like lens.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing like fitting in conformity, comparisons, very Asian cultural norms, hiding weaknesses, the stigma with mental health. And I also heard you mention like shame and guilt and even like stereotypes with like bad luck. And those are all like a lot of different pressures for people who are different, which neurodivergent people are different. Do you want to add anything, Maddie and Danny?
Maddie, you go first.
So I'm adopted, so I can't speak to a lot of the cultural norms, but externally, I was the only Asian kid growing up. I was the only Asian kid. I was the adopted kid. I was the only disabled kid, so I was pretty out there for, but like and I do have a physical disability as well with my CP, so I really did not fit into any type of stereotype. Like, I wasn't good at math. I was too loud. I was too this, too that. And then when you're adopted, it's like I'm not Asian enough for Asians, and I'm not white enough. And like Dennis said, like disability is seen as bad luck. And so kids would be like, oh, she's not good at math. But there was always this pressure to like live up to that model minority of I had to be extraordinary to like in the places where I could, which was intellectually. And then I was ADD, so I couldn't do that. And so I think it's a lot of just pressure, just trying to be extraordinary, and like even when people don't understand.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. It's true, and I think you bring a very interesting perspective. Your experiences are very valid, but you bring in an interesting perspective as an adoptee, which is a whole other challenge by itself. But kind of like you are Asian, you're just adopted, and your parents are not Asian, but like you didn't receive the Asian like parental cultural influences, but like other people are shoving their kind of stereotypes on you, and that's kind of like two very different like cultures, but you're definitely still affected by the judgments of other people who see that you are Asian. So yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add, Danny. But otherwise, we do have a question from the audience. I don't know if Dennis you want to answer, but any daily life challenges with autism to look out for?
You want to go first, Danny, and then I'll answer.
You can answer first. I'll take the next question.
In terms, I guess daily challenge. I guess we'll definitely go into that later. But I think like in terms like just the general, is it kind of like, I guess as an autistic person, like you're navigating a world through a neurotypical lens. So of course there's like lots of like social cues that we kind of don't understand. There's like also kind of there, but the most important things that we have to kind of understand is that I guess we as neurodivergent have our own way of communication, and it's not right or wrong. I think it's like there's some different ways of like filtering that out. I think like kind of like we kind of having that open communication from both sides can really help with navigating that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So we answered that question. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of tie in like another question, which some of you have touched upon already, but like, what kind of stigmas and discrimination have you experienced within the Asian community? Because like, there's discrimination everywhere, but within the Asian community, what kind of things have you guys personally experienced?
I think that actually fits in really nicely, at least for my lived experience, with what Maddie was saying about the model minority myth. I think that the model minority myth is absolutely something that can be perpetuated within the AAPI community as well. Of course, there's a lot of healing and trauma rooted in perpetuating that and kind of understanding and unlearning it, but it definitely affected me growing up. For me, on top of having ADHD, I also have dyscalculia. And so for those who don't know, dyscalculia is a learning disability that affects my ability to process numbers. It's very similar to dyslexia, but instead of affecting letters, it affects numbers. And there's a huge comorbidity of ADHD and learning disabilities as a whole. So that's how it's related with neurodivergence. And so I wasn't diagnosed with dyscalculia until after I was diagnosed with ADHD a few years ago. And so looking back, I definitely think that the mono minority myth was a huge part of it, being told by family members growing up that it's not that I was bad at math, I just wasn't trying hard enough. This idea that like, oh, there's absolutely no way that I can't be excellent. It's really just a matter, like, it's on me, I'm being lazy, things like that. Even in high school, I was told by a group of AAPI students that I wasn't Asian enough because I wasn't good at math. And I'd like to think that we've grown out of it and unlearned those stigmas and stereotypes. But it's definitely something that often gets perpetuated, is conflating that with your Asian identity and what that means.
Yeah, thank you. I think you brought up some, like, just hit on the nail, a lot of good points. But you know, the Asian culture has a lot of like stereotypes, but also just very conformity based norms. They want people to like fit in, right? So if you're too loud, that's you know, you're standing out. People get frustrated. Yeah, there's a stereotype of being good at math, being good at grades. On a minority, there's these stereotypes, and that's just a lot of additional pressures on neurodivergent people, because there is like actual different brain differences that affects your ability to do certain things. That their disabilities might have difficulty with studying, you know, just other mental health issues, and so it's a lot of pressure. And then family members, relatives, they're always like comparing. So you have to be both conforming and extraordinary, and that's kind of very difficult to do. So moving to another question, how has, because our panelists, you guys have a lot of different like comorbidities with different conditions. How has all these multi-layered identities with being Asian American, being like neurodivergent, or like other disabilities, how have they affected your social relationships, whether that be family dynamics, friendship, you know, relationships, work relationships? How have your neurodivergence affected your social life? Let's start with Danny.
Do you say Maddie or Vanny?
Vanny.
Okay, yeah, cool. Happy to start off. I actually, and it's a good follow-up to something that Dennis had said previously about how, like, when you're neurodivergent, open communication with others is really important. And so I think a lot of us tend to really like direct communication, and I think it's also rooted in our neurodivergence affects our ability to process social cues. So at least for me, having ADHD, sometimes I just completely miss social cues. I don't realize, I don't pick up on body language and things like that. And so that can be off-putting for people. And so another thing that we were also talking about too is that I have been told that I give bad first impressions. And now having understanding my diagnoses and how my neurodivergence affects that, I don't take offense to it, because I do think that being told that I give bad first impressions is that being rooted in a neurotypical lens. And so specifically for me, when I first meet people, I am completely myself. I may get more comfortable and more open about things as I get more comfortable with people, but my personality, my mannerisms are exactly the same. Whereas I think oftentimes in in neurotypical expectations of conversations and meeting people for the first time, you start with small talk and you kind of build into your personality. And so when I meet people who really kind of follow that mindset, they're off put by me coming in like hot, and they misconstrue it as, oh, she's coming off too strong and things like that. And so that's why it's bad first impression. And so I think it's about, oh my goodness, my dog is barking. And so having that open communication is really helpful, because it makes me now understand, like, oh, this is the way that someone has understood or interpreted my mannerisms and things like that. And so it really has affected my dynamics and my relationships and navigating people, because it requires me to like kind of take that extra step to really think about like, oh, how are people processing the way that I'm talking, the things that I'm doing? And it's made me much more hyper aware of things than I'd like to be. But it's also helped me at the same time create better and more quality conversations and relationships with people who really understand that too.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Maddie, you look like you wanted to add on to that. You're muted. Okay.
So I have a new saying that I've been saying. It's some people like me, some people don't like me, but no one will forget me. And I live by that because I am a lot of, as a person, I am very loud, I'm very talkative. People have always been very, very hard for me. And actually, when I was younger, I really had a hard time speaking. So I would really speak slowly, like long pauses, and people would think I would be done. So I just wouldn't speak a lot. And, you know, my brother had to step in and like tell someone, oh, you know, Maddie's quiet because she processes slowly. And when you're like 3 topics ahead when she has like processed something to say. And this girl was like, I just thought she hated me. And that wasn't the case, but, when you also have physical disability, I have often felt like I'm too much, like people would take pity on me and talk to me. I also said everything that came to mind, no filter, no anything. And, you know, one of the big things I ran into was that I'd say something or I'd miss something or I'd be really rude on accident or like come off as really rude. And no one would tell me. And so it's taken me a long time to get good friends. Like I have so many wonderful friends now, but it's with the understanding of like direct communication, clear boundaries, clear this, because I don't get jokes. I don't do this. And it's just really hard when you're trying to communicate. And like Danny said, I think it's a huge opportunity for a lot of empathy because I'm always like hyper aware. Have I said something wrong? Have I done something wrong? Like I was always a very talkative child, and that was very frowned upon in my house. But most of my friends are neurodivergent, so that's really been the wonderful breaking point of like they're either neurodivergent or they either have neurodivergent traits, and we get along really well.
Glad to hear it. It seems like we have an audience member that has a hand up, so I'm not sure Anita would like to ask a question. So I'm gonna allow. Hi Anita, did you have a question you want to ask? You have a hand up? Maybe not. Okay, we will put you back in the audience. Maybe, okay, if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box. Just gonna put you back into the audience. Let me see, there's a Q&A. For each panelist, was there something, program, event, personal understanding that you did or took advantage of to improve daily personal life? What about work life? Expand as much as you can. So seems like the audience member wants to hear about whether or not there was something to improve their daily life and work life. So I don't know if Danny, you might have something you want to start with.
Yeah, I can start with this because the very first thing that I want to blurt out is meds and therapy. Yeah,
Nice.
and so I'm pro meds, pro generally just getting the support that you need. I know there's a big stigma about medication, but it's ultimately just support. And when I was diagnosed, I was able to that also gave me access to getting supports in the form of medication, which also helped me a lot to suddenly be like, wow, I can pay attention to conversations for longer than 30 seconds, which I could not do before. I actually didn't even realize that it was something that I struggled with. I thought that everyone zoned out after 30 seconds of a conversation. And so that really helped. But then also specifically going to therapy. And of course, therapy is not for everyone. I think Stephen Yun's character in Beef said, like, Western therapy doesn't work on Eastern minds. So again, in the spirit of whatever personal support. So this is not me necessarily saying everyone should go to therapy, but do what is best for you. But at least for me with therapy, what it did was helped me process why I'm navigating certain situations the way I am and how do I now reflect on it. So then that way, when I recognize a similar situation in the future, I can navigate it in a way that's a bit more healthy for me. Instead of like being stuck in this cycle of being very frustrated and feeling alone and not really knowing knowing that I'm struggling with a scenario, but then not really knowing how to navigate it. Talking about it through therapy has been incredibly helpful to have that professional resource. But then also I've been really grateful to work at a place that is disability inclusive. So again, like having that open communication with my colleagues and really setting boundaries and being really specific. I'm of the personal opinion that your diagnosis, your disability, anything that's your personal life is your business. And so like if I share like, hey, I'm leaving for an hour, I need to step out for an appointment, right? Like they don't need to know if it's a doctor's appointment or therapy or anything like that. All I'm doing is setting a boundary and saying, I'm stepping out for an hour. I hope you respect that. And so, and so that's something that has been really helpful for me is like not getting hung up on like, what will people think if I say this, but just simply putting it out there. These are the things that I need. And that's been incredibly helpful. Because it also is a fantastic filter for me recognizing the kinds of people I want to surround myself with, which are people who appreciate and respect that direct communication too.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Love the energy and love your support and acceptance of this and just being positive in general. It's great. Thank you. Dennis, do you want to add anything? Anything that you have done to daily life, work life?
Yeah, I could add on to what Vang said. Like, I guess Vang's like approach is like one method of doing it because I have my own approach to doing it myself. Like, kind of like for me, it's like, I think for me, it's like kind of for me, it was more of like, I kind of grew up like in a way of like, I think for me, it was a lack of support system for myself. I think that for me was like, once I kind of have that, I didn't, because like when I was first diagnosed with like autism, I was pushed down medication. I felt like if the person actually tried to get to know me, then we can work from there. I think that was like not necessarily, I was like, I was kind of resistant to medication at first, but then also kind of was like, you know, like, so I kind of worked with a life coach, kind of worked through like unlearning the whole like system and neurotypical way of thinking. I think that was like the biggest safe factor for me was that there was nothing wrong with me to begin with. And I think that's when I realized that if I could just approach my life with thinking this way of like, there's nothing wrong with me. I have my own way of communication, and it's the right people that actually get to know me, they'll stick because it's like they actually kind of see what's more quality in me that like they actually do connect with. And I think that was like the biggest factor for me in that thing. And for me, it was that I also like learning, I guess like kind of after kind of putting my story out there about my journey and then connecting with other neurodivergent folks, I just realized that there's nothing wrong with us to begin with. I just get along fine with other neurodivergent folks, and it was like it was kind of like the way neurotypical how our world wasn't designed for neurodivergent folks or inclusive in that way. And so it kind of made us feel like we had to kind of mask or kind of like go through years of like without any support and stuff like that. And I kind of went through that process of like, I was like kind of, unlike Manny and Maddie, I was more of like the quiet kid and kind of not necessarily outspoken. I was more of, like just kind of doing my job, getting good grades, try getting good grades, try to get good college, and just doing my way. And everyone say how am I doing? I'm always saying good, but inside I'm definitely still deeply suffering from everything I'm else going through. Like I consider myself a high functioning depression at the time, where I was saying everything's okay, everything good, but inside was definitely like so bawling all those emotion, all those like trauma from years of it. And yeah, it only took that diagnosis for me to realize that, I'm sick and tired of living this survival mentality of just getting by and pretending to be okay all the time. And so it took me that realization, I need someone to talk to that actually that can get me. So I kind of like reached out to a life coach who has shared lived experience with me that can relate to most of thing of like Asian American upbringing. And so I kind of had that as a way to kind of work with that. And I kind of sooner or later I kind of felt like a finding community was also like important for me as well, and connecting to the disability community, and then and kind of going into like meeting other neurodivergent folks, and I kind of met like Vanny and Maddie here. Like we just hit it off, like.
Sure, yeah, I hear like a lot of talking about your story, making friends, connecting with people. So that's definitely one way to go about it. I don't know, Maddie, if you have anything to add on, like aside from like therapy, medication, and connecting with the community. You're muted.
Well, definitely agree with meds, definitely agree with therapy. And I had to do a lot of like rewiring of my belief system, because after so long of not being able to do work or not being able to do school and not being able to do this or that, I got on meds. I was always in therapy, but I got on meds, and then it was like, oh my gosh, I can actually get things done. Like, and it really helped my mental health in like just, saying, oh, I can do this. There wasn't a problem with me. I just didn't know how it worked. And like, I didn't have the support. So I think it's just like loving yourself and like making sure to give yourself all the credit you deserve, because it's really, really difficult. And like, we have community. We got to find the community, but we have community. I think it's just a good reminder to have confidence and stuff like that.
So we actually have a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm going to pull up some of the questions. So how did you, I'm going to combine a few questions. So how did you, you guys, the panelists, how did you deal with like high expectations from parents, and how did you deal with anxiety? Maybe you can kind of touch on both of those. Let's see. Maybe you're not ready yet. Who's ready? Let's start with Dennis.
I guess like in turn doing a high demand for like our parents and stuff like that. Like I personally, it's a work in progress. I think like there's definitely like that barrier of lack of understanding from a side of it. Like just because you're aware of your diagnosis, and just because you're aware of like your disability, not necessarily like your parents or kind of like a family member may not understand that. And also it's also kind of they're not at a place where they're able to understand based on their cultural upbringing and stigma that's within the community. So it's also like this time where like it's kind of a place where like you kind of have to give yourself a lot of self-love and self-grace in that period of time, and and just kind of work on it and kind of have that boundary. There's going to be time when there's clash a lot, there's going to be fights a lot, and it happens. And I felt like just surrounding yourself with like the positivity and just kind of get yourself in that headspace of like positivity, that you're not all those negative things that your parents say about you, or like all these things about you, and just kind of have to deal with it. It's always a work in progress, but I think like part of it is just realizing that like our parents are human, but also like they have their own stuff they're going through. And of course, like because we have talked about like is neurodiversity and like autism, ADHD can be like genetic based, and so they may have it. So what I kind of learned throughout this process was I started empathizing it I started seeing more of like their neurodiverse quality or traits, I start to empathize with that. Because like, oh yeah, they're like me in that way, and they're kind of going through similar thing as me, but although they're not able to articulate that, or they're not able to say what they need to say, I'm able to kind of see that they're kind of going through their own stuff. But like, it helped me empathize with that. But it also kind of made me feel lonely because they're not able to support me. So that I had to kind of seek support outside of it. That's why I mentioned community and seeking life coach or professional or whatnot that works for you in that way to kind of like meet your needs and demands. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Let me, we'll touch upon, okay, we'll get back to, answer a little bit of, I'm going to have us talk a little bit about mental health since we are touching on some of that. And someone was interested in how to deal with anxiety. So let me just have you guys tell your stories about how you guys found out about your conditions first. So we also have to let the audience know about kind of the context of how you guys found out about ADHD, autism, other conditions, because I know you guys have multiple other disabilities as well. So we're going to do that and we'll have more context for discussing other mental health issues. So Maddie, do you want to start first with telling your story?
So my parents are white, so they're very supportive in this, and it's very lovely. I actually went to a school with kids with ADHD and dyslexia. I went to a school that specialized in this, and a lot of it helped me, but yeah, it was, I'd always had it in my file, and I just wasn't on medication because my parents were very against medication, and it's only been the last like two years where I have gotten medication, taken the medication, and like my life completely changed. I did have to go through a large period of mourning for my past self because I was like, wow, what if I had like, you know, antidepressants and like ADHD meds in high school? It would have been wonderful. And then it, like, a lot of things made sense, and it was a journey of just, okay, I have this, what does this mean for me? And like, you know, getting that confidence of, oh, I can be a productive person, I can do this, I can finally live up to my potential because people thought I was lazy. And like, I had so much pressure on me, like, but it was more internal. So it wasn't like a big reveal. It was just like, oh, this actually matters and this helps. And now I'm fully openly neurodivergent. I will talk to anyone about it. I will say that to anyone. And like, living with a physical disability, I've had to live with the like idea of like, either, okay, I got it, set the tone, I'm awesome, like I don't care what anyone else thinks. But then I also go from like, this is really hard and people look down on me and people suck, and like getting like that diagnosis and getting medicine really brought that together, and like, which, okay, I'm gonna do my own thing, I rock, and I'm gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna meet awesome people and take them along with me because we all deserve empathy and like to celebrate neurodivergence.
Do you want to talk about your self-discovery journey with your conditions? Yes?
Oh, what happened?
Oh, you're muted.
Can you repeat that?
Do you want to like talk about like your self-discovery journey? Like, how did you find out about your neurodivergent conditions?
Oh yes, sure. So it happened like back in 2020 when I was like, I was like kind of like I guess prior to that, my official autism diagnosis was actually in 2020, but it was more after like I guess like during a few months prior to the pandemic. I was like hang out with like my in-law at the time. There was like the family was actually because they have family of members who and friends who have like autism, so that's how they were familiarized with autism. So after kind of spending time with me and just getting to know me, they were like, oh well, like we suspect you have autism. So they kind of tell my brother about that, and then my brother kind of like, oh, like you may have autism, like, and then they're like, then you're like, we want to get it checked out. I was like, sure, why not? And so that's how it all started. And I think like when I kind of started filling out the survey and information about autism, and I think that was when like the psychiatrist like kind of like go over it and kind of like she was like, oh, based on how you fill out your question and answer, like you pretty much have autism. I think that was like the first realization of that. And I think I kind of mentioned before how like spent years of like not knowing anything or kind of feeling the lack of connection. I think it was kind of went through that years of like kind of that shift in perspective once I got that diagnosis was like, I don't want to live life in this way anymore. It's time for me to do something about it. So then that's when I kind of was like reach out to a life coach, do something out of the norm for once, and then I kind of pursuing something creative. There's always that creative itch, so I was always like I want to be able to like get out of my comfort zone and then doing something different. And that's when it kind of led me into like this the advocacy and kind of like going to like find community for myself and connecting with other neurodivergent folks. And since then it also kind of led me into, as I learned more about neurodivergent itself, that was also when I connected with Vanny Respectability, and that also led me to realize that I also have other disabilities, neurodivergent disability like ADHD and like CPSD along the way that I was like wasn't aware of, and that's how it all kind of came together.
Or how did you find out about what you got?
So I was formally diagnosed with ADHD in 2021. But I was first diagnosed with anxiety and depression in college. And so what had happened was actually, it was because I was working at the organization that I do now. And so through better understanding and learning more about different disabilities in the context of my job, I was reading about ADHD and I was like, wait a minute, there are a lot of things here that are really relevant to me and also address things that anxiety and depression don't. And so I was also grateful to be surrounded by other ADHDers in my work as well. So I had talked to them, asked them about if this was something that applied to them too. Did they relate to it? And ultimately something that one of my wonderful colleagues said was, stop. It's your imposter syndrome talking. If you think you have it, just go and get answers to the questions that you've had. Even if it isn't, you'll still better understand yourself. And so I went to a psychiatrist and I was diagnosed within the first 10 minutes. The big thing also to note is that self-diagnosis, at least in the disability advocacy community, is a perfectly valid form of diagnoses because there's a huge lack of access to a formal medical diagnosis, whether it's like access to the healthcare system, financially, stigmas tied to it, things like that. Like I technically don't have a piece of paper that says I have ADHD. I just have a verbal confirmation from my psych and a prescription to treat it. But since then, it's been really great because I've been able to connect with other neurodivergent folks because I kind of better understand having that shared lived experience. I've also been able to reconnect with folks who are neurodivergent and look back and say, oh, that's why we connect. Like, I think I actually met Dennis before I was formally diagnosed, but we've been friends since. And so to now also have that shared lived experience that we can talk about and connect with has been really wonderful, and to be able to understand myself and also now be able to better communicate boundaries and things like that as well. So
yeah, thank you. And I really love that quote that you brought up from the Doctor Strange movie.
Oh,
that?
Yes. So when I was diagnosed, thank you for reminding me. So when I was first diagnosed, something that I would always tell people, so for anyone who has seen the first Doctor Strange movie, the Ancient One tells Doctor Strange, like, you've been looking at your life through a keyhole and now you have a key to open the door. And that's really how I felt of like, I was getting this very small piece of like understanding life. And then since the diagnosis, it really expanded and helped me understand like, why do I navigate the things that I do? Like, why am I the way that I am? And it's just been a really great experience to just understand that and get like that full picture.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's see, we are almost out of time, so let's try to answer what we have in the Q&A here. So what are some of the challenges when transitioning from school life, either college, high school, etc., to adult working life, and specific lessons learned? Do any of you want to share that transition?
Wait, yes. I was actually very excited for this question because I think that for a lot of neurodivergents that are living in a neurotypical world, we tend to take direction really well because we're all over the place, very confused. So we're like, we need that like discipline in that process and those procedures and the rules. So, like, we're very good at following rules as long as we understand why they're in place. And so when you're growing up, right, like you're given rules, parameters, boundaries by your parents, your family. There's like a very strict like academic setting where like you have deadlines, you have a very strict schedule, you have to go to bed at this time to be able to wake up at this time and things like that. And so when you graduate, like, and I think a lot of like early career folks can relate to this, not just neurodivergent people, but when you graduate, right, all of those schedules and disciplines and rules are thrown out the window and you're like thrust into this world where you have to like kind of create that for yourself. And so it gets really confusing because like, especially for folks like us who are like diagnosed, right? It's like, well, now how do I create those boundaries? Because I don't even know what works best for me. Someone has always told me what works best for me. So that's also why getting the diagnosis has been really helpful for me. Because transitioning into adult working life at the same time, I've been able to really understand what is most helpful for me and also be able to communicate that with others. So at least like in my current role, right, like I will tell my colleagues like how you can best support me is by doing this. Or if they ask me if I can do something, I say yes, but can you provide me with XYZ first? And it's not even like a special ask or anything like that. It's something as small as, hey, they told me something verbally. Would you be able to repeat it via email so that way I can have a receipt of it and I can remember, right? Or, hey, can you resend me the link to the Google Doc that I need to fill out? Like even tiny and small things like that. And it's just getting in a space where being more comfortable with asking for things and also like accepting that support as well. Is a new thing that I'm at least trying to learn because it's always just been given or like told to me. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think that was very useful that you pointed out with the structure and the rules that like come from schooling, and then yeah, definitely a transition to adult life when you no longer have that. I think that's a very relevant to like autistic struggles too. I don't know if Maddie and Dennis, you want to add on to anything that Benny has said, or just agree with what she said and we want to go to the next question.
You covered it all for me.
I could add I could add to Vanny a little bit, like, because I think for me it's like it also comes from like a place like, you know, like we kind of been given rules and expectation of what to follow based in college and high school, where it's like there's like already a set formula we had kind of go through, and then even in college they're like, oh, there's certain requirements we have to kind of do, there's education we have to follow, but then when it comes to like outside like post grad, there's like no set of rules and no set of things, so we kind of create our own path, but then we don't necessarily know. And so it was more of like kind of like, oh, like there's like the traditional 9 to 5 route, and that's kind of like the typical way to kind of approach it. But then it's not necessarily, it may not necessarily be the right environment for you, or kind of the approach to you. It kind of you have to figure out like, okay, which environment worked best for me, and like kind of figure it out from there, as opposed to like, you know, just kind of go into the route. Because I kind of my career trajectory kind of went all over the place, versus I know like other people who kind of got a job and kind of rise the ranking very easily. For me, it's like I was like I should get things done very quickly, And for me, it's like it's not necessarily the 9 to 5 job doesn't work out that well for me. Though, like, and I think I always kind of get things done very quickly, and kind of feel like my struggle with the job searching and stuff like that had always come about for like I'm always too green and overqualified because I can do things very quickly to the point where they don't see me clocking in, and kind of like they're like, what if you're doing too fast, like you're not here to grind and all this stuff. So I also often kind of get into that situation, and then kind of knowing how to communicate your needs and then be upfront about it is also like the key to my diagnosis. Was also like after kind of spending years just masking and not saying anything, or like kind of like accepting the way things are. But then after the diagnosis, I kind of learned to communicate, set boundaries, kind of know exactly what works for me, what doesn't work for me. Even though I get in trouble, I don't really care, because like at least it's like I know I'm articulating my needs, and I kind of like want to make sure that I'm being accommodated at my workplace or wherever I choose to kind of pursue. Yeah.
I think you bring up like a good point about like the communicating the accommodations, but yeah. Okay. So thank you for sharing. We're running out of time, so I'm going to go to the final question. So dating life, best dating sites for neurodivergent people, or advice on anything dating. We'll probably just use the rest of the time to discuss this question. So, completely up to you guys, tips or whatever. It is definitely like, difficulty communicating with people, but like, yeah, this is Danny, do you want to start? I see you making faces.
Oh, thank you. Thank you because see, this is why I do best with direction. By the way, I love this question. My laughing is not because it's a bad question. I just love it so much. I don't know if there's a dating site that's for neurodivergent people. I feel like someone should make one. That's a fantastic idea. I did meet my partner on an online dating app, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as like, this is the app you should go on to meet other neurodivergent people. But at least for me, so my partner of 5 years is also AAPI, also neurodivergent as well. And one of the wonderful things about our relationship, and specifically dating someone who's neurodivergent, is that we, and it's actually the same way I feel about his AAPI identity, is that we have this like very similar shared experience. And so we connect on that level, and there's a lot of things that can be left unsaid and he can just get it. And then vice versa. And so I think like my general like big picture dating advice is to like find people that you really connect with and just kind of understand how your brain works, how your lived experience works, whether it's like your neurodiversity, your identity, your lived experience, your trauma, whatever it is, has been really, really nice to do. So yeah, I'll leave it at that because I'll just start rambling.
Thank you for sharing. Addie and Dennis, do you have any stories or tips you want to share?
I am not qualified to be answering this question. I am not qualified. My dating history is not. Hi, Mom. She's here. So, just as far as like better dating apps, they're all trash. I have them deleted right now. But if you're a woman and you're not afraid to say hi, Coffee Meets Bagel seems to be a good one. And I've had like the most success with Hinge. I meet really cool people from Hinge. Whether or not we date is a good question, but yeah, I just like, and if I find someone with a similar interest, I'm just like, hey. But I'm not qualified. Dennis?
I guess I don't have much expertise in this area, but I guess after navigating relationships like in general over the past few years, what I kind of noticed was like between neurodivergent and neurodivergent relationship and also neurotypical relation is very different from each other. And I think like even though like there's like you would think like neurodivergent and neurodivergent would actually click initially, yes, there is that initial bondage and clickness, but also there's like this layer that's like we're all going through our own trauma, and so there's also that trigger, the clash that will tend to happen, and it's also that journey that will come with it, because there's always these quirks and traits with ADHD and neurodivergent folks that like we trigger each other. And there's like those times that you have to get through that as well. It's not like all like sunshine and rainbow from like the thing that, oh, just because we're neurodivergent, we're going to get each other. Like, yes, we understand each other as how each other works, but it's also like, it's also a factor that it does impact us very differently. Like, let's say like someone cancel a meeting on you, and then you're actually like getting triggered by your rejection sensitivity disorder, and it's like, and you don't know why that is, and it's kind of frustrating, but you actually care about the person, and you actually understand why that is. And it's like, it's also kind of a struggle to kind of navigate through that as well. And of course, like with neuro and ND and NT relationship, that's like pretty much like what we kind of grew up with, kind of not other people, not, we have to be the one to educate them and teach them that way, unless they're the one that very supportive and very understanding enough to want to learn about you and try to get to know you that way in order to kind of build that connection. But if it's just mostly your end, it's like you're also self-advocating for yourself, and that can get definitely very lonely. I think that it does, some NT relationship works. It depends on your upbringing and various other factors that kind of impact you. But like, and then it's like other instances, like other ND relationship is like kind of the way to go, because they actually understand you. I think like after kind of talking to a variety of different ND people, like I kind of get the flow of like things that way and how things work.
Thank you for adding that. I think you brought up really good points with the traumas and healing. I would like to just, help wrap up, but I do think like a big thing regarding dating is that really is very important, not just for neurodivergence, but for everyone, to really work on healing traumas before, like, not that you can't date, but it's the more you heal, the better you understand yourself, the easier it will be to be able to relate to other people and to like find who you do connect with. So that's a pretty big point. And being able to understand yourself will also help you find people who are able to accept you. And so, yeah.
Find neurodivergent people. That usually works out well, or doesn't. But yeah, neurodivergent people, good bet.
But yes, there is that natural connection between neurodivergent people. Neurodivergent people, they, like, for the different conditions, they do be on the similar wavelength. That is true. And they do have a intrinsic understanding. Their communication styles are similar. And yeah, going between neurodivergent and neurotypical is possible, but it takes like proactive effort on figuring out that communication difference. That's the thing. Unfortunately, there will not be a recording of this, at least not for this particular webinar. Yeah, so that's just for this session. Thank you all for being here and for listening to the panelists. That concludes our session, as it is now 3 o'clock.